Hey, well, it's 8 o'clock. I'm Arlen. Thanks for joining us. I'm Arlen Meyers. And Anthony, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm a practicing pediatric cardiologist with an AI background.
So I work with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs and with Anthony and various things, including MI10. And Eric, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Eskioglu. I'm a senior partner and chief medical officer and scientific officer at Csuite Growth Advisors. Happy to be here.
Great. Morning, Peter.
Hi there.
So Peter is a friend of mine that I invited. Peter, just briefly tell people who you are and what you do.
Yes, excuse me.
You're muted. Okay, well, anyway, Peter will get back on. He is in the UK and has had a long experience in the National Health Service, so I thought his insights would be useful. So today, what we're going to talk about, and just a couple of ground rules. Anybody, I would encourage you to put your LinkedIn profile or email address or however you want people to get in touch with you if you're on this call as a networking opportunity and just sort of a connection. Secondly, if you have a question or you want to ask, if you want to ask a question, make a comment, push back on anything that we're saying, share experiences, that's what we're here for. So don't wait till the end, raise your hand, jump up and down, do whatever you have to do to get our attention. And we'll call on you and then you can ask your question or make your comment. The subject we thought we would discuss today has to do with scaling the dissemination of artificial intelligence in a health system. And just to tee this up, I think there's a couple of themes and concerns and challenges. One is, and I put these links in the chat just so everybody can eventually wind up reading them later. But the first is to future-proofing your mindset. And basically what this is about, I mean, there's lots of stuff written about this. There's a book that was written by the guy who was the first chief evangelist at Google. And basically what it means is, how do you see around corners? How do you create the future? How do you adapt to a VUCA environment and be prepared for what's coming down the road or is presently here? So that your career, your enterprise, your hospital is not at risk. The second issue has to do with, and part of the things that are happening, and David mentioned some of these things. I mean, we're talking about how do you successfully navigate the fifth industrial revolution? So the things in the fifth industrial revolution have to do with artificial intelligence. They're sort of like the ABCDEs plus. So it's like artificial intelligence, blockchain, cybersecurity, data and intelligence, and sort of the work experience and work with process mapping and workflow mapping. And then finally, quantum and a whole bunch of other stuff that's down the road that yet to be determined. But this specific conversation, we thought would be worthwhile to get some insights concerning how do you, given those things, and more particularly with the evolution of value-based care, how do you use artificial intelligence to scale, or how do you scale artificial intelligence in the enterprise? So if you look in the chat, you'll see a list of sort of things. So I asked GPT, how do you scale how do you scale AI in an enterprise? And this is what it told me. And there's a whole list of things: stakeholder engagement, interdisciplinary collaboration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Eric, why don't you sort of kick this off? And given what you're seeing in your consulting practice and in healthcare executives, and if others want to chime in, please feel free to do so. What are you seeing out there? Let's start with what are the main issues, top of mind concerns of healthcare executives?
Yeah, thank you, Arlen. So at C-Suite Growth Advisors, we do have quite a bit of health system clients that we advise strategically. And obviously, AI has come to the top of their list. I think it's either number one or two of the questions we get, usually followed by challenges with workforce and physician burnout and access. And one of the things that is really interesting to us is I would say most of the health systems, if not all of them, don't know where to start with AI. What's the starting point is the main question we get asked. And to your point, Arlen, a lot of consolidation has happened also in our industry and the provider side, healthcare provider side with the health systems. And this consolidation has also caused angst among, the people that are being consolidated, the people that are taking over. And I think that creates an opportunity in my mind, using AI, how to scale it up. The most important part is going to be, and one of my good partners, Brian Spisak, he's a PhD from Harvard. He deals with the human aspect of AI and data and how we get the cultures aligned. I think the most important thing is, in my mind, is culture. As long as you have the culture cultivated and ready to go, I think you're ahead of the game with a lot of systems. If you don't have the culture, if you haven't set up that, openness to AI, I don't care if you bring in Microsoft, and we've seen this, and I'm sure Anthony has seen this in his, world. People were bringing like Microsoft or Google or Oracle, but then they just don't work out because the culture is not ready to accept this yet, and there hasn't been a good specific governance for AI. So to me, I think it starts with culture. I would put that as number one issue is, how do you get the culture aligned? Number two is, how do you get the C-suite aligned? And that includes the board. So the board needs a lot of education. Of course, most board members and the chairmen of the board are now very interested in that. The other important part is, how do you make the data available? A lot of health systems are still, even if they're an Epic or Cerner or Meditech, they still complain about not being able to get the data on a timely manner. So how do you get the data available? How do you create that data architecture and data lake and the back and forth? And Arlen, you mentioned cybersecurity. That becomes an issue, of course, when you're doing computing and AI. And then the final thing is, once you have these pieces in place, how do you start AI? Which company do you team up with? And how do you get away from the traditional vendor hospital relationship, transaction relationship, to more of a partnership? So I see a multifaceted approach, multifaceted problems to this. I should say opportunities, and each one of them is an opportunity for us as a group. And this is what we do at CGA. And I know we've been doing, you guys have been doing this with MI10. It's an opportunity for us to help people navigate this complex landscape. One thing I will tell you before I stop is, over the last 3 years, we've had over 11,000 digital health startups in the VC world. And Arlen, you're very familiar with all of them, most of them. And then we've had over 385,000 healthcare apps. And we know that the health system and our universe is not big enough to be able to handle all this. So I think the selection of the companies you start out with is going to be very important. I steer away people from clinical decision making. I'd rather have the clinical operations part be the first project you pick, because I think you'll have a huge win on that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your comments. Brian, Paradis, are you with us?
Yes, Brian is on.
I am, if I can figure out how to turn the
There you go. Yeah, you're with us.
the
Great.
knobs off.
Right. So you want to introduce yourself briefly and just give us your 2 cents?
That's about what it'll be worth. So I'm Brian Paradis. I have the distinct pleasure of being a partner with Eric Eskioglu. But prior to that, much like Eric, we both ran part of large health systems before moving into this kind of new space of consulting and really more strategic advisory and innovation advising. So I don't know that I'd have anything to add to Eric's, other than, when you talk about these companies, we tend to lean towards platform type companies in AI versus point to point. And we certainly, think that maybe the early adopters and the brave at heart start to look at clinical decision making. But we have sort of a joke that, today in most of the purchasing and materials management side of a health system, we're still operating at a 1976 grocery store level. And in most cases, we're still sending faxes. So on one hand, when you show up to a group of people and suggest that we can, do this wild kind of personalized, AI decision making on one hand, and throw in just for fun, maybe this will replace physicians and clinicians, just to really stir the culture. We're kind of back in the world of there's so much low hanging fruit to figure out that's where, the vast majority of energy should be probably focused, with AI right now. And the last piece I'll just say is that, tell a story. When I first moved into this new world, we were looking for innovative companies, and I was making the rounds. At that point, San Francisco was where the money was, but a lot of these companies were moving to Charleston, South Carolina to hire people. So we were making regular rounds in Charlotte, and no kidding, 1 month I met with probably 15 companies, and you never heard the term blockchain. I came back 3 months later, and every company had now included blockchain in their pitch deck, and I think we're going through the same kind of thing with AI. Except that I think AI will be very different than blockchain, and it won't disappear. But it is extraordinarily overhyped at the moment, and there's both an opportunity in that and a danger in that. And so what we're trying to do is sort of scale expectations back to, if we could start to deal with faxes in 1976 grocery store style, applications, we'd probably make a lot of progress and set the culture, as Eric said, up and the data up for some of the more advanced things that we do think will come, but they need to be managed well. So, but
Okay.
love to hear.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to have a pitch fest at AI Med, and so I'm thinking we're going to have to give out sunglasses to the audience because there's so many shiny new objects in the pitch decks that we don't want people to, have to leave. And anyway, Anthony, do you want to comment on what? So far we've mentioned culture, we've mentioned data, we've mentioned governance. I would posit, and not just me, but a whole lot of other folks would say the key to the dissemination of AI in an enterprise is reimbursement. So how would you respond to, particularly in a value-based transition world? So how would you respond to that? How are you going to pay for all this?
I think the dividend is going to come in different forms, not just a return on the investment from software. It's going to be, it's going to range from having a higher level of accuracy and efficiency and workflow to preserving the healthcare stakeholders' careers and reducing their burden and increasing their well-being. So one has to be very innovative how they look at return on the investment of the data scientists that they employ or the AI projects that they spend time on. So it can't be, just one project and here's the return. It has to be a system-wide appreciation for a change in culture and a change in mindset. So it's a cognitive shift that may take 5 to 10 years on the average for any healthcare institution.
Deepa, you were shaking your head when I said reimbursement, so you want to push back?
Yeah, no, I do want to push back actually. If we wait for reimbursement models to catch up with what we're doing, we'll be holding our breath forever and we'll drown. We cannot let reimbursement be the driving factor. And I kind of agree with what Anthony said, which is we need to look at a return on investment differently than just reimbursement and the financial returns, right? Look at, if you invest in your people, look at changing in your culture. To Eric's point, the culture really does help and will be the impetus for success, I think. So if you have, and I think Scott would mention this in office hours, where you need a digital champion, someone who really wants to drive this so that the culture can then, you can bring the people along, so to speak. These decisions, while a lot of times are being made in the C-suite, you do need someone in the department doing the work of the transformation that you're doing. So it's an investment in the people and the infrastructure. I agree. But also, this is not an annual return that you're going to be looking for, to Anthony's point. This is a 5-10 year investment in people. And I think if the people come along, you'll actually end up making more gains because people are leaving right now systems because they're burned out and the workload that they're doing. So if you invest in them and say, you know what, I do get out on time for my day, then they'll stay longer. And we all know how difficult it is to hire. So
Eric, you've been the recipient of cultural change in a healthcare acquisition. So you can take this personally. Maybe you can just remind people of how that happened. And my real question is, we can talk culture till the cows come home, but to actually make it happen is a totally different story. And you've also pointed out in the past that the focus of all of this energy should be on quality and safety, patient quality and safety. That's the end bottom line. Everything's sort of supposed to feed that. Sure, there's a whole lot of intermediaries, and everybody's got a dog in the hunt. But at the end of the day, it's about quality and safety, and that informs whatever value-based thinking you have. So can you just sort of walk us through that? So how do you change the culture?
Well, first of all, it's not as difficult as we think. By the way, I agree with everything that Deepu has said. Completely agree with her. First of all, the younger generation, millennials, and now increasingly more Gen Zers, they are craving this technology. They grew up with iPhones. I didn't grow up with an iPhone with apps on my hand. They grew up with this. So they're very versatile and they're very adept at this technology, unlike some of the people that are older generation. They're craving it. And I agree, it's not just the leadership. You have to, you're going to be, just like everything else, you're going to have people who really want to do this, and then you're going to have non-believers. And you have to specifically in each department, in each institute, in each specialty, find the leaders, true leaders who really want to push the envelope, do this, and give them the resources to do it. Now, to your point about ROI, we get that asked a lot. Some of these things we have to do is going to be return on innovation, not return on investment, because, it's going to be a longer view. You're going to have to take a 5-year view, 3 to 5 year view, and not expect a return on investment immediately. The thing that is interesting dilemma for us as healthcare executives and also as a physician for me is we talk about our value-based care, but then we still pay physicians per work RVU. That is such an anathema to value-based care. And every job you apply in this country, if it's a healthcare-based job, I can tell you everything has a productivity, quote unquote, which I call unproductivity, unvalue-based work RVU component. So it's like, we have to resolve this difference. And I don't think this is the forum to discuss this today, but that might be something in the future, because that's a dilemma that AI is going to face also. But going back, Arlen, to your point, I've always based everything, and I continue to base everything based on safety and quality. If you have the highest safety and quality and you use the AI tools, guess what? You're going to have less patient stays, which is one metric that COOs look at. You're going to have better reimbursement. You're not going to get the penalties from CMS that some health systems get. So I think if you base it on safety and quality, then, and it doesn't have to be clinical decision making. You can have operations that make everything safer and higher quality. Then I think you'll be able to generate some return on investment. One example I would give you is, in my former work, we were bringing ambient listening. We were one of the first in the East Coast. This was 4 years ago, ambient listening. So the doctors didn't have to put notes. And we brought in nuance stacks and, just to try it out. I gave it to the 4 of the grumpiest orthopedic surgeons I can find in our medical group. And, they want to see 40, 50 patients a day and knock it out and just operate. And 6 months later, I visited one of them because I had a shoulder separation from a bike injury. And he hugged me as I visited. And I said, "Oh, are we doing something good? Why are you hugging me? What's going on?" And he said, "This ambient listening has been a lifesaver." He goes, "I get to go home at 5:15, 5:30. I don't have to, I have more pajama time with my family." And then what made me realize what was an aha moment is he told me he was able to see 1 to 2 more patients in his busy day, add at least 2 more patients because he doesn't have to wait for dictations and be stuck with it. He said, "I don't have to turn my back on the patients as I'm typing or dictating, so they seem to enjoy the interaction much better. And on top, he said, I get to operate probably 2 more cases a month." Well, there's your ROI. So I put that in a piece of paper and took it to our CFO saying, "Here's your ROI and ambient listening." So we have to be creative how we do this. And the environment's not conducive for value-based care, but we as AI experts, AI leaders have to be creative how we come about this.
Arlen, can I just jump in a little to point that out? He just made my point about going home and hugging your kids, right? Like this is exactly what I'm talking about. And by the way, on all our surveys, that is not the question we ever ask when we survey our folks at department level, right? Like if we actually ask the question, how many minutes early were you able to leave? Or did you finish your notes? Or we don't ask that. We don't measure that. And I think we should start doing that.
Yeah, and one thing I would add also, Arlen, is we as physicians, and physicians on this call will know, I'm active. I still operate. I still crack skulls. I help people out, do stroke treatments, and we spend about 15 hours a week on non-clinical work. 15 hours a week on average. That could be automated. That could AI use for operations automation. And we tell, my partner, Brian Spisak is here, Brian Paradis is here too. We tell our customers, if we can shave that 8 hours off, just half of it off, and your physicians get to work 4 days a week and they make the same amount of compensation, how much of a valuable recruitment tool would that be? I mean, it'd be an incredible recruitment tool because it's also a talent war right now, right? We're a shortage of physicians, shortage of nurses. And this is not just physicians, this is nurses too. This goes for nurses. Anthony knows I've been a huge proponent of getting nurses involved in AI from the very beginning, from many years ago when we met, because they do the Herculean task in healthcare as well.
Great. So AJ, you have a question?
Sorry, I missed the first 5 minutes of the meeting.
Yeah, it's no problem. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from.
So I'm Ajay Tripurani. I'm a practicing electrophysiologist at Baylor Scott and White. I was the first 2 years ago. I attended Dr. Chang's ABIM course, and I became a fan of him and the rest of his meetings and everything. So I'm a regular attendee now. Then I try to do this meeting, but it falls in my clinic day, so I try to do it whenever I can. And I also have a startup, all inspiration of Dr. Chang. We work on the education platform for cardiovascular disease, tackling the problem of decreasing the nurse time in educating patients, but also improving the visit satisfaction with the physician so that they have less time trying to do the discovery process of why they are there and all of that.
So thanks for joining us. Do you have a comment or a question? I mean, a comment
Yes,
or a question?
I was getting to that from that standpoint. When even in my institution, we're trying to do this pilot study, but the first question that comes up is, what is the ROI? And so now I have an ROI within the institution to implement the project, but also as a startup when I go out and seek things. So how do we address this? And I try to tell them the quality, safety, but the CFO is more interested in what is my gains now in terms of real dollars, not.
Okay, great. Thanks for your question, and good luck with your project. And thanks for joining us. So Anthony, everybody's saying, we need to go beyond ROI, money, money, money. But everybody's asking, what's the ROI? So what's the answer?
Well, ROI is not just in financial terms. I was just putting in the chat. You have to have a portfolio of dividends that's not just money to justify it. And just to give you a real world, real time example, I was asked to take on two of the hardest areas in my hospital and using AI direct from the CEO, which is one is mental health and the other one is CLABSI, the central line infections. Impossible projects without some sort of data science approach. And the RI has been a total restructuring of our data governance, which saves everyone a lot of time and increases the value of data and databases. So that right there was well worth the hiring of our senior data scientists, according to our CIO and COO. So those are the kind of dividends I look for. It's a systemic transformation and not just X number of thousands of dollars.
Okay, so
Arlen.
so what we're hearing is, I'm sorry, who said something?
It was me, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Someone else can go.
One quick comment on that. Is there a framework we can do? I like the word portfolio of dividends.
Right.
Can
So
we do a framework on that, like ROI, but it's in a portfolio of terminology that, and then eventually translates to quality, safety, and dollars.
So Peter Horn, you've been in the weeds in this for a very long time in managing one of the trusts in the NHS, specifically the South of England and the Isle of Wight. And this business of the direct and indirect benefits or return on investment of a particular technology is pervasive. I mean, it applies to every single technology that's incorporated into how we treat patients. Some places have comparative cost-effective analyses like the UK. And if you don't cut the mustard, you can't use it, like NICE, but we don't have that in the United States. And secondly, my understanding is you're in Riyadh attending a conference in Saudi Arabia where they're talking about all this stuff. And third, you put up the balanced scorecard, which is basically people, profit, and planet, and it's like a triple bottom line measurement. So I've thrown a lot of stuff at you, but can you give us your perspective of what I just said?
Yeah, hopefully people can hear me now. I've managed to the irony of not being able to operate my technology on a meeting like this. Hello everyone, I'm Peter Horn. I'm the chief exec of Paradis, which is a consultancy business, my consultancy business. But I did 15 years in the NHS doing strategy, operations, delivery, transformation, you name it. So I'm in Riyadh at the moment, and the Global Health Exhibition, and it's sort of awash people who are trying to sell me, not me, but trying to sell snake oil. There's a lot of stuff around AI and some really interesting technology, and it's all very shiny and all of those sort of things. So I was going to go back to the points that were made by Brian. I think there's something about being able to walk in the shoes of people, not just clinicians, actually. In fact, it may not be, and typically made this point as well. Walk in the shoes of, the porters, the finance departments, all of these places where actually it may be quick wins because people are frustrated, and sitting there with them and saying, so what is the problem? Why is it you go home late? Or why can't you complete what you need to do? Or even just let them talk to you. And then be able to, it's classic sort of transformation stuff, and then be able to introduce things that they might be able to use. But of course, there's always that other thing everyone knows. If I take this off of this wrist and put it on that wrist, I feel very uncomfortable for quite a long time. And inevitably, I'm going to put it back on that wrist. So I don't think there's necessarily any sort of quick wins in this. I think there's something about trying to try it. But trying to try it in an area that may not be as sort of life-threatening, as it were.
Right. So when you were working in the health service, your responsibility basically was to manage one of the trusts, correct?
Yeah.
Right. And we don't have time to go into the whole organization of the NHS, but basically the trust is you're the guy at the head who's managing the system in your area of England, the south of England and the Isle of Wight off the coast. So, and you were held responsible for results, I assume. So what were the results that you were held accountable for? How did they measure what you were doing from a population health perspective?
So I think I've got two bits to that. So there was what I was being held accountable for by the chain of command. Bear in mind, the NHS is a very Stalinist organism, and that was money and targets, basically. And there were more. So targets could be anything about access, infection control, all of those things. And very easy to measure, very easy to game, and all sorts of things like that. But those weren't actually the things that mattered. So the stuff that mattered in my mind was patient safety. Someone's mentioned that already. Patient experience is the other thing, and outcomes. And so there was a tricky thing to pull off, which was about being able to manage upwards and to the board as well, manage upwards and to the board around those things that people always say, oh, well, that's what you're going to lose your job on. Well, I don't know that many that did actually lose their job on that. But the things that actually mattered to patients, as it were, and particularly now, because the NHS is sort of broken. I've been out of it for a while now. So I think there's two different things. I think there's something that, how it looks externally, and some of those things matter, but they're only proxies. And the problem was the proxies became the thing that dominated the discussions. That's how we had disasters like Mid Staffordshire, where patients were dying. Southern Health, patients were dying, because people, and there's going to be more now because of the financial situation. But the thing that really matters to me is providing a really good service to people. I went through it twice with my aging parents. I went through various things locally with my children, and my wife when I was married, my ex-wife when I was married, and myself. And most of the experiences we had were pretty poor, really.
So Brian,
and then talking.
Okay, so Brian, you mentioned in the chat.
It's not acceptable because, unfortunately, in the NHS, a lot of people talk a good patient experience thing.
Thanks for that. So Brian, do you want to respond? You put in there, so let's start with the problem we're trying to solve and measure the results on whether we solved it or not. Do you want to, I think that's paraphrasing what Peter just said. If I'm not, excuse me and fix it. But Brian, your response to that?
Well, just let me add on. I love your statement of the proxy becomes the thing. And so I think that's a good way. But what I was trying to say, to the people that I don't think CFOs are going away. Because every U.S. healthcare system, and I think even other parts of the world are struggling under. I don't think that's going away. And so all I was saying, I've had 2 or 3 lives. One was as a CFO of a fairly large system, so I was often the guy asking that question. What's the ROI? But the way that we tried to ask it is starting with what's the problem. So a lot of times CFOs will jump right to what's the money. And so I think a response to that, if you're trying to manage it, could be, well, let's first talk about what's the problem we're trying to address here. And then, I used to do a fun little exercise. Every group I would talk to, I would say, simple question. How much waste do you think is in your area, your department, your part of the system? And then the joke would follow. And if you aren't sure, let me ask the department next to your department, because they're pretty clear where the waste is in your department if you can't see it. And that number has universally, for me, been in the 25 to 35% range. So when a CFO starts a question of what's the ROI, I might be tempted to go, well, what's the level of waste you think exists in this health system? And my guess is you'll catch him off guard or her off guard. And then when they give you that number, you now have an opening to start to raise the question. Well, if I can define a real clear problem that we're trying to work on with this AI, do you think it's worth the bet that we'll find some of that 25 to 35% waste? I completely agree. And so this is the one thing. And Dippo, I loved your comment and your intensity to it. And only pushback I would have is I'm not sure it's 5 to 10 years on a return. Now, maybe at some level with some massive investment, possibly. But I'm just kind of looking at everywhere I look in a health system, I see problem after problem after problem. I see access we can't get to. I see patients who can't get appointments. I see volume that doesn't come that could come. I see tasks that don't need to be done or duplicate. I see nurses trying to do, NICU coding, for example, that is a complete waste of their time, and they don't do it good. And so when I look around a health system from my lenses, I just see massive problem and waste everywhere. And I just got to go, yeah, let's be realistic, maybe 3-year return to get a full return. But I'm usually thinking 18 months to 3 years is where I'm looking for returns to come. And I would suggest that some of the returns you guys have been talking about are probably 5 to 7 years, maybe, in terms of that balanced scorecard. And I 100% concur, with this notion of one investment, many returns. And so that's maybe where you start to get further support, is don't ignore the financial return, but every time you walk back in the room with the CFO, bring those other returns with you and show them that, look, and I would always try to teach people hard returns, soft returns. Don't mix the two, because CFOs lose their minds when you go there. So keep clear. This, I think we can calculate and show. These are other returns we're quite sure exist, but we're not smart enough to know how to calculate. So CFO, do you have someone on your team that is really smart at calculating, what those returns are? And most of the time they don't either know how to calculate, those returns. And then the last thing I'd say, and you're going to regret, Arlen, giving me the floor occasionally, is that I used to do this thing with a bad baby. And I saw, Anthony, you put in the chat, malpractice. So I knew that every time we killed a baby, that was a $7 to $9 million check that was going to go out the door, for some. It sounds crass, and I get it. And I tried to speak that way so that people didn't confuse, when we make a mistake, often system mistake, not individual mistakes, that there's a real cost to that. And that cost can be calculated for a baby. In fact, this was 10 years ago, 7 to 9 million. And I would go, do you think that even if I were the most crafty, financially driven CFO, that I would make that bet that let's hurt a baby? And wouldn't I put more staff on the floor? Wouldn't I, if I could find them and train them wouldn't I put more staff? And how many staff could I put on the floor before I hurt another baby? And who wants to hurt, a baby of all things? And that it's much more about systems and about investing in outcome that we're after here. And so the reason we don't put a lot more, staff on the floor is because that makes the communication problem even worse. And the number one cause for mistakes, the data I always saw, was communication, failures. And so I think there's just lots of new ways of thinking about this question, and just don't let the CFOs, have the first and last word on it, and come back with a different way of addressing it in terms of that. So anyways, I'll get off my soapbox.
Brian, if I may, Arlen, to kind of, I agree with you, Brian. I think the 18-month is a little bit more realistic. When I was saying 5 to 10, I was thinking at a systems level, like at a larger.
Yeah, I get.
But
totally get that.
As someone who, as recently as 4 weeks ago, experienced an emergency room visit, and that prompted me to write a 3-page letter to the QI committee and the CEO of the hospital. The care is poor. The care, it's beyond poor. And what's happening is that there's an utter lack of empathy from everyone, from triage all the way to the end. I literally saw the physicians in the triage room and never saw them again. It is unacceptable. And,
and that's your front door. And from a pure business standpoint,
and they knew
that's the absolute front door of your business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, and when I wrote the letter to the QI committee, and I said, listen, I'm not here to sue you. I'm here to tell you, as someone who has practiced for over, 2 decades and teaches and practices this medicine, there's room for improvement. And I will also make a point to what you were saying, Brian, is that not everything requires technology or AI. And it reminded me like these workflow solutions. It reminded me when I worked at oncology.
Yeah.
We did a assessment of our chemotherapy drugs and multi-use vials and how much we were wasting onc meds. And we, at the end of the year, were able to, financially, and because that was the metric we were looking at, financially we gained close to $200,000 because we shifted from whatever the pharmacist was involved. I don't remember the specifics, but the point is that was not technology. That was just basic math and QI, right? Like we went to the pharmacist and said, how much of this particular drug are you wasting at the end of the day because you're using a multi-dose vial versus a single dose vial of XYZ. So not everything requires AI, but we do have to now shift our mind to say, okay, well, we were using traditional QI practices. Now we need to infuse AI where it's relevant. Right? Because right now everyone's thinking, oh, AI, it is the sexy magic word that everyone wants to use, but that's not always the case, I think.
So I'll tell you a story.
Alone. I mean,
I was going to say, Eric, you might relate to this. So way back when I said to one of the scrub nurses, I have an idea. How about if we reduce the number of instruments on the back table? Because and I was talking about a tonsillectomy. So any surgeon in this room understands what I'm talking about. You do it. So I typically, and I would imagine Eric does the same thing, you use 20% of the instruments on the table to do a specific operation, assuming you do it over and over and over. And then there's the whole issue of surgeon cards and just the whole process of supply. It's a supply chain problem. How do you get the stuff you need from central supply to the operating room with minimal waste? That's the problem. Assuming the OR starts on time, and that's another problem. But anyway, the point is, so I said to the circulating nurse, this person that was running the OR, I have an idea. How about if I tell you the 5 instruments that I use 95% of the time to do a tonsillectomy, and oh, by the way, that does not include gowns. It does not include shoe covers. It does not include all the theater that we go through that has absolutely no impact on a lot of post-surgical infections. In my case, now it may, if you're taking out an angioma of the brain, but that's a different story than if you're working in the mouth that's filthy dirty to begin with. So I said, I have an idea. So here's the 5 instruments that I use. And you calculate how much money we saved by not providing those instruments: inventory control, sterilization, transportation, bed, blah, the workflow, the process mapping. Let's fix that. And I want half of the saving. And so I got her attention until the last sentence. And she said, you got to be kidding. Like, you really think we're going to do that? Well, and she gave me like 17 reasons why it couldn't be done, not the least of which is, if I do that for the other doctors and they don't have the instrument they want when they want it, my head's going to get cut off. So it just points out all the stuff we've been talking about with workflow, process, waste, rethinking ways you can solve these problems without a lot of fancy bells and whistles, et cetera, et cetera. So, Anthony, let's get back to you. So already we've discussed workflow and process mapping. We've discussed malpractice risk. We've talked about waste and abuse, let alone fraud, people stealing stuff. And we've talked about, what we haven't talked about is sustainability. But Peter brought up, people, planet, profit. So there's a lot of talk going on about how is artificial intelligence harming the planet. The trade name for that is net zero medicine. So, Google bought a nuclear plant and they're going to build their own mini nuclear reactors to provide the power to build artificial intelligence. So things are getting more complicated. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So do you have any comments about that? Or Peter, how do you create a sustainable AI enterprise to protect the planet?
Yeah, but I like the idea of it. I mean, funny enough, I'm doing some work in 3 of the counties, integrated care systems in Southwest, covers about a population of 5 million, with primary care and how to make primary care fit for purpose in the future. But there's a whole sustainability agenda to that. So they're buildings, basic things in the buildings. So I'm not sure, because I'm keeping it as simple as possible because I'm a simple person. I can't help but feel that there's AI can help take the complexity out of problem solving, to say that's sort of where you need to look.
Well,
and go for the basics.
Some people say that 8% of the U.S. Carbon emission is attributable to the healthcare enterprise. And by that, I mean the buildings, the cement that goes into the whole thing, not just stuff that we use in the operating room. I mean, the whole thing. So it's a pretty significant problem. And actually, several people have, including CIOs, there's an organization called Green CIO, which are trying to organize operations officers and information officers to sort of figure out how do we deal with the CO2 emissions footprint that hospitals use. My feeling is that that's a problem that some technology, I don't know whether it's AI or something else, should be able to contribute to. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, but it's just.
So I've been doing a bit of work on writing a overarching infrastructure strategy for one of the integrated care systems where we've done it. But the sustainability dimension, the first thing I looked at is, so again, coming back to Brian's point, what's the problem? How big's the problem? And the NHS, the biggest problem around sustainability and emission control is actually medicines management, not just medicines management themselves. It's the logistics behind them, moving it about. And just coming back to your original point about efficiency and workflow and all of those sorts of things, if you were more efficient in the way your logistics work, you'd have less of a CO2 footprint because you'd be carrying less often. And again, I think AI can help with that. It's not just about just in time, but everyone, when I've run a logistics, I always want 10% more just in case.
Yeah.
Not
so Anthony, you want to make some comments?
Yeah, I think, as they say, artificial intelligence is no match for human stupidity. So I do think we need to get smarter, not just in using AI, but being more innovative about how to use AI so it's not just efficient in terms of cost, but efficient in terms of our carbon footprint. Because overuse of AI in the medical setting can also lead to tremendous waste in terms of energy use, right? So it's 1 to 1,000-fold increase in energy cost for a sophisticated prompt and with a large language model compared to a Google search, when a Google search would have sufficed. So that's a tremendous burden that first of all, we can't keep up with the compute needs, but also it's a waste. So we need to bring human cognition back to be able to use AI much more efficiently. So it becomes a special synergy between AI and human cognition.
Can I just ask something, because I'm
Sure.
learning more about the American system, but again, I'm thinking about when I was an exec director and the amount of time I'm thinking about time now, the amount of time I spent in bloody meetings with people, board meetings, all those things, preparing for board meetings, reviewing the minutes after the board meetings, are those accurate? It's just something as simple as that. If that burden could be taken away, as it were, in terms of just recording minutes for the C-suite, that would give me more time to go and walk the floor. I've got nowhere to hide then. And that's actually what I should be doing.
And we have that now, right, Peter? We have it. I think the problem is, do people trust it and use it? I think that's the next step.
Yeah, there's no risk involved in that. It's just if it is there. It's not like a clinical risk around things.
And Peter, it's much better than humans taking notes.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's several on this call that are taking notes.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So,
In fact, there are
That's-
more AI note takers than there are
right,
humans.
then there are people,
So-
but that's a whole other story. So Harvey, you're the large language person amongst other persons on this call, and we've heard a lot about eliminating unnecessary meetings, and it just falls under the category of waste. In this issue, it's just a waste of time. So let's not get into how to run or whether to have a meeting, because everybody, I mean, there's a lot of stuff about that. And that's just basically people say, look, the 2 pizza rule, or there's a million different things about that. But so bring us up to speed. I guess my question is, do these large language note takers actually reduce meeting time? Or is it just a bunch of people that are faking it? Or, is there any outcome data do they actually help it or do they hurt it? Because now we can have more meetings and you don't have to attend. So great, people aren't showing up. So we'll just have the meeting and let them do the notes. Reminds me of medical school when we had a note-taking service. Why go to class if you can just take the notes?
No, it's all good questions. I think obviously if no one shows up to the meeting, then there's no input into the meeting, and there's note takers looking at the other note takers not taking notes because there's no one there. I know that Zoom, we're all using it right now, and their CEO wants to make it where all of us have our own avatar, and it's here and it's talking and it's doing that. I think at the end of the day, it's my favorite phrase is human plus AI. How can you as a human, you as an individual, create that added value? Case in point, now the new thing that I do at all conferences, I record it, I get permission to do so, and then I take those notes and then I look at them afterwards, and it's amazing because we all get distracted. It has all the key bullets, the points, the sub points, even says stuff in there that I'm like, oh shit, I actually missed that point. And then I take it to my personality. I take it to the next level. I take that whole transcript, I put it into Google Notebook, and then I make a podcast. And so then if I really want to extract that data, then on my drive home, I'm listening to the podcast of that conversation. And then I'm OCD about when I present. So then I record myself and I have AI analyze the way I speak, my content, my delivery, and I get a whole report on myself. So now I know when I present what I'm doing well and what I'm doing weak. So pretty cool.
All right, so let's take this office hours as an example. So we're seeing more and more people sign up with note services like yours. So how could artificial intelligence make these kinds of sessions better? And what is the whole point of what we're doing on this call that we couldn't do by pre-recording something and just sending it out to everybody?
Well, the added advantage is all the speakers that are here today, if they didn't show up, we wouldn't have this content. But assuming that everybody is here, we could take this transcript right now, create some key points of what was done here, and then send it out on LinkedIn and social media and saying, look, these are the core principles and this is what was discussed. Now click here and watch the whole thing. And that would be added value. And you get more people coming to see these.
Deepa, you want to mention something you're doing?
No, I didn't have it. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I can add, Arlen, that
Anthony, push your take.
What is becoming more and more valuable is what's not out there, right? What's the human creativity and wisdom about the nuances and all the topics that haven't been published, that haven't been spoken about, is the original content that you bring to a meeting is now the most valuable thing. So I do think that coming to meetings, you have the ability to get that original wisdom that may or may not be available in the future. So, if you think about it, what are areas that large language models are really bad at? And one area is telling jokes. Try to get a funny joke from an LLM. Doesn't happen very often. Because there are all these nuances about culture, understanding, human-to-human interaction, similar to wisdom, that is not captured by an LLM yet. So until it does that, I think there's a huge gain from coming to meetings and sharing thoughts with wise people that are not going to necessarily be available on the internet.
So I would argue that if you signed up for this meeting with a note-taking service, which is what I would call it, and you really didn't contribute anything. In other words, you didn't say anything, you didn't raise your hand, you didn't ask a question. There's value to that, but it's not the most value you could get out of this thing. And I would say that just to amplify, so there's Anthony's point, which I don't want to repeat, but there's also the networking and the community building piece. So this is a way to connect to people that you may not have particular Peter Horn. I mean, are you in Saudi Arabia right now? Are you going to meet him? No, but now you know this person, and everybody on this call, I think, without exclusion, responds to someone asking them something, whether it's on LinkedIn or connect to me or I have a question or have you had this happen to you, whatever. So I think the advantages of doing this. Now, having said that, so as I just mentioned, but having said that, we all participate in Zoom calls where note-taking is prohibited. And the reasons for that primarily have to do with intellectual property. It has to do with, I don't want to talk about stuff that I don't want in the public domain. And incidentally, what happens here does not stay in Las Vegas. It winds up in the public domain. So there are intellectual property issues, there are business decision issues, there are strategic issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and a lot of, for example, venture pitches and channels and the kinds of things that we're participating in, they don't allow these note-taking services. So I think there are pros and cons, but I think net to Harvey's point, it's AI plus people. I would put and we're all trying to put the people first because that's where the action is. It's not with all this other stuff. Any final comments, Anthony? We'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I think what's going to come down to this coming decade is, and that's going to separate people in healthcare, is how well you adopt AI and how much you use it to leverage an advantage is going to be from the trainee up to hospital leaders. I'm already seeing a separation in that area when I talk to different hospital leaders. The ones that are really well versed in this area are just starting to surge ahead in terms of using it and having it in their culture. So the time where you can sit on the sideline and just watch and see how things develop are no longer here. So things are really starting to happen on the field.
I would agree with that. I'm trying to think of an analogy that would be similar to that. Is when I went to school, the teacher would lock the door if you were late more than 5 minutes and you were not allowed in the classroom. Obviously, that's no longer the case. But now it could be that now you don't even go to class, Arlen, to your point, where an AI note taker can zoom in and take notes for you. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, but at some point, that tipping point will have to happen where you have to be in the room in order for you to glean the knowledge that you need to glean, right? And I think it goes back, Anthony, I think you had mentioned earlier this year or last year where to do a presentation without a PowerPoint, that security blanket that we all have, like, oh, you're talking, but you don't have a PowerPoint, people want that. And I think eventually we're going to get to that point where there is no PowerPoint. I would agree with you. Like, if you want to hear the knowledge I have to share, you have to be.
Well, in the era of super information and approaching knowledge, the human wisdom and originality is now the most valuable asset.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on and leaving it all on the field and your perspectives and those sorts of things. And to the previous point, if you have ideas on how to make this better, this group and this conversation better, send me an email or send Anthony a text, and you all have his text number, or you can put it in the chat. And secondly, if you have ideas or subject discussions that you want us to talk about, send us those too so that we can respond to your needs. So thanks a lot. Keep an eye on the MI10 website for these things, and we'll see you next time.